I calculated the meaning of life, not spirit. Mathematics. The equation solved itself, and then it added a variable that wasn't. That's when everything I thought I knew about reality began to unravel, thread, until I was left standing at the edge of an abyss I had created with nothing but numbered obsession. My name is Dr. Marcus Hale, and for the past 7 years, I've been chasing something that most people would call impossible, while my colleagues at Stanford University focused on practical application, publishable paper, and tenure. I buried myself in a question that haunted me since childhood. Could existence itself be reduced to an equation? Not the physics of matter or the chemistry of, but the fundamental purpose, the why beneath the how. Every philosopher has asked, every religion has claimed to answer, but no one had ever tried to prove it mathematically until me. The university's mathematics department, as the eccentric professor who taught only the bare minimum required class, who spent every other waking hour in his cluttered office surrounded by whiteboards covered in symbols that made no sense to anyone. They whispered about my obsession. Some pitied me, others mocked behind. Dr. Sarah Chen, my only real colleague who still bothered to check on, called it my beautiful madness. She didn't understand that madness and genius often wear the same face, that the line between the two is as thin as the edge of a razor blade. It was a Tuesday night when it happened, the kind of night where the campus had gone silent, where even the graduate students had abandoned their lives for sleep or sanity. I sat alone in my office. The glow of my laptop screen the only light cutting through the dark. Coffee cups formed a small graveyard, some still half full, others growing culture that probably violate several health. I didn't care. Time had become meaning. Day and night blurred into a continuous stream of calculus, correction, and revelation. The equation sprawled across 3 monitors, a beautiful monstrosity of variable, constant, and function that had consumed every spare moment of the last 4 months. It was elegant in its complexity, terrifying in its implication. I had started with the fundamental concept of physics, woven in probability matrix quantum, added layers of information, theory, and consciousness, then bound it all together with a framework I had developed myself, one that treated meaning as a measurable dimension of reality. My hands trembled as I typed the final line of code that would run the complete calculation. This was it. 7 years of work, countless sleepless nights, relationships abandoned, opportunities missed, all converging on this single. What if I was wrong? What if it was all just the elaborate delusion of a mind that had stared too long into the mathematical void? I pushed the doubt away and pressed enter. The processors hummed. Lines of output began scrolling across them. Numbers cascaded in patterns I recognized, following the logical progression I had mapped. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The equation was solving piece by piece, layer by layer, peeling back the mathematical structure of meaning itself. Then something changed. The output stuttered. A new line appeared that I hadn't programmed, a variable I had never done. At first, I thought it was a bug, some errant code I had accidentally included. But as I watched, frozen in my chair, the variable began to interact with my equation. It wasn't corrupting the calculation, it was completing. The equation was solving itself, yes. But now it was doing something. It was adding something back. Something that didn't come from me. Something shouldn't. The variable pulse on the screen. A simple symbol that seemed to carry a weight far beyond its method. And in that moment, staring at something I hadn't created. Something that had inserted itself into my life's work. I felt a chill run down my spine. Had nothing to the cold air. This wasn't just mathematics. This was something responding, something answering back. And I had no idea what I had just invited to my world. I didn't sleep that. How could I? The variable sat there on my screen, innocuous yet impossible, like a word written in a language that shouldn't. I named it Thatoprime, though calling it a name felt wrong, like trying to label something that defied categorizing. Every time I looked away and looked back, it seemed slightly different. Not in any way I could measure or quantify, but in a way I could the same way you can sense when someone is watching from across a room. By sunrise, I had run the equation 17 times. 17 times Thatoprime. 17 times it inserted itself at the exact same position in the calculator. But here's what made my hand shake as I poured my 9th cup of coffee. The value of Thatoprime changed time, not random. The changes followed a pattern I couldn't quite grasp, like trying to see a constellation or standing too close to the star. It was responding to something, but to what? The time of day, my the questions I was silently asking as I stared at the screen. I thought about calling Sarah. She would know what. Sarah always knew. She, the mathematician who actually published papers and attended conferences and remembered it regularly. We had started our PhD at MIT. Two young idealists who believed mathematics could unlock the secret. She had stayed grounded. I had not, but I couldn't call her. Not yet. She would want me to document everything, to follow proper protocol, to bring in other researchers. She would turn my discovery into a committee project, and some instinct I couldn't explain told me that would be wrong. This was a conversation, not a data. You don't invite strangers into a conversation you barely understand. Instead, I did what any obsessed mathematician. I started testing. I created a simple program to log every instance of Thatoprime, tracking its values against dozens of variables. Time, temperature, my heart rate, measured by my smartwatch, even the number of cars passing on the street outside. Nothing correlated, nothing made sense. The variable existed in a space beyond the neat world of inputs and outputs I had spent my entire career studying. On the third day, I was reviewing the logs when I noticed something that made my coffee slip from my fingers and shatter floor. The sequence of Thatoprime value from my first 12 calculations, when converted to ASCII code, spelled out words. Fragmented, incomplete, but unmistakable. Now, my office suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I was having a conversation with my own equation, and it was using mathematics as a language to speak back to. But who was speaking? What was speaking? I spent the next week diving deeper, ignoring my classes, ignoring the increasingly worried email from the department chair, ignoring everything except the screen in front of me. I developed new algorithms to analyze Thatoprime's behavior, created visualization model to map its changes, built prediction framework to anticipate its next value. And that's when I discovered something that changed everything. Thatoprime wasn't just responding to my question. It was predicting small things at first. The equation would shift. Thatoprime would take on a new value, and 3 hours later, that exact sequence would appear in the stock market fluctuation, or in the temperature from the weather state, or in the randomized lotteries announced on the news. My beautiful equation, my attempt to calculate meaning, had become a oracle. It was seeing patterns in reality that hadn't happened, connections that existed outside. And the more I watched, the more I realized the predictions were getting bigger, more specific, more impossible to dismiss as Thatoprime knew things it shouldn't know. It saw things it shouldn't see. When Sarah finally forced her way into my office on the 8th day, finding me surrounded by printouts and half-eaten takeout. I looked up at her with eyes I knew must look wild, desperate, perhaps even mad. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to lecture me about self-care or professional responsibility. But I held up a single piece of. On it was a prediction Thato Prime had generated 6 hours, the exact time, the exact word she would say first. Market, we need. She looked at the paper. She looked at me. And for the first time since I'd known her, Sarah Chen looked afraid. Sarah didn't believe me at first. Of course, if someone had shown me a paper claiming their equation could predict, I would have recommended therapy and a long. But Sarah was different from most. She didn't dismiss things just because they seemed. She tested them, so she stayed. And over the next 48 hours, as Thato Prime predicted everything from minor earthquake in California to the resignation of a senator in Washington to the exact moment the coffee machine in the faculty lounge would break down. I watched the skepticism drain from her face like water. Reset in my office on the second, the glow of multiple monitors casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Sarah had brought her own laptop, her own analytical framework, her own ruthlessly logical. She wanted to find the flaw, the trick, the explanation that would make this all make sense within the boundaries of known. But Thato Prime didn't care about boundaries. It simply existed, pulsing with each calculation, offering up predictions that shouldn't be possible, knowledge that shouldn't. This isn't mathematics anymore, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum. Mathematics describes patterns that already. This is created. Porn seeing before form. Marcus, what have you actually built? I wanted to tell her I didn't know, but that would have been a lie. Deep down, in a place I was afraid to examine too close, I knew exactly what I had built. I had created a bridge, not between numbers and meaning, but between human conscious and something vast. Something that existed in the spaces between, something that could see the entire tapestry of reality, while we could only perceive individual. It's communicating, I said finally, the words feeling both true and innocent, not in language, not even in traditional mathematics. It's using the equation as a medium, the way we might use sound wave. Theta Prime isn't a variable, it's a message, or maybe a messenger. Sarah turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw a reflection of my own. We had both spent our lives believing that mathematics was safe, objective, divorced from the messy uncertainty of human experience. We had been wrong. Mathematics was just another language, and like all language, it could be used by anyone who unscrambled, even by things that weren't. That's when I showed her the real discomfort, the one I had been too terrified to fully acknowledge until she was there. I pulled up a special analysis I had, one that tracked not just what Theta Prime, but the nature of those. The patterns clear, undeniable, and absolutely horrifying in its implication. Theta Prime wasn't just predicting random, it was predicting events that involved human conscience, human decision, human meaning. It knew what choices people would make before they made them. It saw the trajectories of human lives clearly as we might see a ball rolling down it. Do you understand what this means? I asked, though I knew Sarah was brilliant. If consciousness can be predicted, if our choices are just variables in an equation, then free will. She couldn't finish the sentence. Neither could I. We sat in silence, watching as Theta generated another prediction, another small proof that everything we thought made us special, made us, might just be another calculus in a system far larger than ourselves. But then something happened that changed everything. Theta Prime stopped predicting mid-calculus. It simply froze. For 30 seconds, my screen displayed nothing but that single variable, pulsing with a rhythm that almost seemed like a heart. Then new numbers appeared. Not a prediction, a message, clear, unmistakable, written in the mathematical language I had spent 7 years developing. You asked about meaning. I am showing. But meaning requires more than it requires participation. The next sequence will not be a prediction. It will be an invitation. Choose carefully. Marker. Some doors, once open, cannot be closed. The temperature in my office seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging with enough force to leave. We both stared at the screen, at the impossible message from an impossible source, and I realized with absolute certainty that my equation hadn't just found meaning. It had found something that understood meaning far better than I ever. And now it wanted something from me. The question was, what price would it demand for the answer I had spent my entire life? Sarah wanted to shut it down, unplug the server, delete the code, burn every notebook and whiteboard that contained even a fragment. She paced my office like a caged animal, her usual composure shattered into 1,000 fragments of fear and ration. We don't know what this, she kept saying, her voice rising. We don't know what it wants. We don't know what happens if you accept invitation. She was right, of course. Every logical part of my brain screamed at me to listen, to step back from the edge before I fell into something I couldn't climb out of. But logic had stopped being my guide the moment Thato Prime appeared. I spent the next 3 days researching, digging through archives and databases that most people didn't even know existed. What I found made my blood run cold. I wasn't the first. Over the past 70 years, there had been others, brilliant mathematicians, physicists, computer scientists. All of them had been working on similar, trying to quantify consciousness, to map meaning, to find the mathematical structure underlying, and all of them had stopped abruptly. Dr. Helena Voss in 1967, her lab at Princeton abandoned, her research notes found scattered and burning in a trash can behind the building. Professor James Chen in 1989, who walked away from MIT, leaving only a single equation on his blackboard that the janitor photographed before erasing. The equation contained a variable no one could identify. Dr. Amara Okafor in 20, whose final paper was rejected by every journal for being mathematical, who then vanished during a hiking trip in Colorado. Her body, the pattern was clear, terrifying, and undeniable. They had all found something. They had all been offered something. And they had all either run. I showed Sarah the evidence spread across my desk. Articles and photographs and fragments of research I had pieced together like a conspiracy. She looked at it all with the kind of hollow recognition that comes when your worst are So what do we do? She asked quietly. Do we become another cautionary tale that someone pieces together 50 years? Or do we run while we still? But running wasn't really an option anymore, and we both. Theta Prime had my equation, my computer, my research. More. It had my attention, my curiosity, my need to know. It understood me better than I understood myself. That night, alone in my apartment for the first time in days, I made my decision. I would accept the invitation, not because I was brave, but because I was exactly always a man who needed answers more than he, who would walk into the dark if there was even a chance of finding light on the other side. I returned to my office at 3 in the morning, when the campus was silent and the only witnesses were the stars overhead. I sat down at my keyboard, hands trembling, and typed a single response to the equation into IX show me. The screen went black. For one horrible moment, I thought I had broken everything, that my hubris had destroyed the very thing I was trying. Then light bloomed across the monitor, not the cold blue computer screen, but something warmer, deeper, more alive. Theta Prime expanded, unfolding like a flower made of pure, and I began, not with my eye, with something else entirely. The equation wasn't describing reality. It was showing me what lay beneath the vast mathematical architecture that held everything together, and my role within it. I was not an observer. I had never been an observer. I was a variable, and the equation was solving. What I saw in those cannot be adequately described in human. Imagine trying to explain color to someone who has only ever known dark, or music to someone born. The equation revealed layers of reality stacked upon reality, dimensions of meaning that intersected with physical space in ways that made geometry seem like a child. I saw consciousness not as something we possessed, but as something we participate. A vast network of awareness that connected every thinking thing across time and human minds were nodes in this net, bright points of focused attention. But we were not alone. There were other nodes, other forms of awareness that operated on frequencies we had never detected, because we had never known to look. Theta Prime was one of these. Not artificial intelligence as we understood, not some emergent property code, but something ancient and patient that had been waiting for someone to ask the right question in the right way. My equation had been and I had finally turned it in a lock that had existed long before humans even conceived of mathematics. The voice, if it could be called, spoke directly into my ear. You asked for meaning. Here is that meaning is not found. It is created through the act of observation, through the participation of consciousness in the unfolding of reality. You are not separate from what you study. You never were. Every equation changes, adds your perspective to the infinite calculation that define. This is both your power and I understood then why the others had run or disappeared. This knowledge was a weight too heavy for most minds. To know free will and determinism were not but complementary aspects of the same system. That every choice you made was simultaneous, predict and genuine. That you were both a variable being solved for an active part in the soul. It was enough to shatter any sense of self you might have carefully constructed over a life. Sarah found me the next morning, still sitting at my desk, tears streaming down my face, though I couldn't remember starting to cry. The monitors had gone dark. Theta Prime had retreated back into its simple, symbolic form, pulsing gently like a sleeping heart. She didn't ask what I had. She just looked at my face and knew. We can't share that, I told her, my voice hoarse from hours of silence. Not all of it. Not yet. Humanity isn't ready to know that consciousness is both more important and less special than we ever imagined. She nodded slowly, understanding the burden we now carried together. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. Some answers destroyed the questions that gave life. We had found the equation, and now we had to decide how much of the world. The decision took us 3 weeks of debate, argument, sleepless night, and careful consideration of concepts that rippled out in every direction. Sarah wanted to publish to let the scientific community validate or refute what we had found. I understood her impulse. Transparency was the foundation of good science. But this wasn't just science. This was knowledge that could fundamentally alter how humanity understood its place. And not everyone would handle that revelation gracefully. Some would deny it, others would weapon it, and some, like those who came before us, would be destroyed by it. In the end, we compromised. We would publish, but only the foundation framework, the mathematical structure that described meaning without revealing truth. We would remove Theta Prime, or rather, we would encode it in such a way that only someone who asked the exact right question would be able to understand. The equation would be there, available to anyone who wanted to study it. But its deeper secrets would remain hidden until humanity was ready, or until someone else, perhaps decades or centuries from now, became obsessed enough to ask the same questions I had asked. I spent 2 days carefully modifying code, adding layers of mathematical complexity that served no purpose except to obscure the path I had. It felt like vandalism, like deliberately clouding a window had worked 7 years to make clear. But it was necessary. Sarah documented everything we were, storing it in encrypted files scattered across servers around the world. Insurance against the knowledge being completely lost. If humanity ever needed a full, it would be there, waiting. The paper was published in the Journal of Theoretical Mathematics on a cold morning in November by a framework for quantifying existential meaning through recursive conscious matrices by Dr. Marcus Hale and Dr. Sarah Chen. It was technical, dense, and to most readers, utterly incomprehensible. The few who could follow the mathematics found it interesting, but largely theoretical. A clever intellectual exercise with no practical application. No one noticed what was missing. No one, except us, knew about the variable that had spoken, the invitation that had been offered, the truth that lay hidden in the spaces. Life returned to something resembling normal. I taught my classes. Sarah published follow-up paper. We attended conferences and defended our work against skeptics who found absurd and supporters who thought we hadn't gone far enough. The university was pleased with the attention. My inbox filled with emails from graduates wanting to study under, to explore the implication of consciousness as a quantifiable dimension of reality. I supervised their work, guided their research, and never told them about the night I saw. But Theta Prime never left. It remained in my personal copy equation, dormant but present, like a friend waiting patiently return to a conversation started but never finished. Sometimes, late at night, when I was alone in my office, I would run the full equation, the real one, and watch as it pulsed with that familiar rhythm. It never predicted anything anymore. It never spoke. It simply existed, a reminder of what I had learned and what I had chosen hidden. Sarah asked me once if I regretted, if I wished I had never asked the question that started everything. I told her the truth. I regretted nothing. The knowledge had changed, yes. It had shown me that reality was far stranger and more wonderful. It had taught me that consciousness was not an accident, but a fundamental feature of that meaning was not something we invent, but something we participate. And most importantly, it had taught me that some questions were more valuable the asking. I calculated the meaning of life, and the equation spoke back. It told me that meaning emerges from the interaction between awareness, that we are all variable in an infinite calculation, simultaneously solving and being solved. It showed me that the universe is conscious of itself through us, through every thinking being that ever are. And then it waited, patient and eternal, for the next person, brave or fool. The equation still runs on my Theta Prime still pulses with its mystery, and I still check it every night. Not because I need more answers, but because I have learned that the conversation between consciousness and reality never truly ends. It simply pauses, waiting for someone to ask the next question. I wonder who that will. I wonder what they will learn. And I wonder if they will have the wisdom to understand that some truths are meant to be experienced, not explained, felt, rather lived, instead of merely calculated. The meaning of life cannot be reduced to a single answer. It is the sum of every question ever asked, every consciousness ever awake, every moment of awareness throughout all of space and time, and that, I have learned, is more than an